Hello and welcome to the Process Over Profit podcast. We're streaming live to Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. And I'm welcoming Blaine Fuhs.
It's like you say, yeah. It's like moose, but with an F. So Fuhs.
Okay,
yeah, that's how it is.
Fuhs, sweet.
Yeah.
So Blaine y'all is a serial entrepreneur, filmmaker. I want to say filmpreneur. Just making up terms now. But small town, Southern Indiana, to now big time, living large in LA.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to jump into just talking about video business, e-commerce. You sort of do it all, man. So I'm excited to chat. We started on Clubhouse. We met through Dylan, and
crazy.
Now look at us here making content for the masses as we like to do, and as we make money on. So.
We should have told him. We should have told him that this was happening, but I know it came up so quickly. I should text him right now, actually.
Yeah, I mean, he's been busy too. I've been trying to reach out to him about some green screen work because I'm trying to do more podcasting stuff in the back of our office.
Yep.
So I've been talking to him about either buying like a a cloth or painting the wall and lighting it a little bit. But the dude's been in like Arizona and traveling and deserts and stuff. Like,
yeah, he's been putting in the work. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, let's do a little bit of background on you. I know you sent me a PR sheet. Just like, this is just big time right here. I read through it. I'm like, I would love a PR sheet about me, but he sent me a PR sheet with a little bit of background on him. But you have to tell us anyway, because our viewers just don't know you. I mean, some might if they're your friends tuning in. But who are you and how'd you get into filmmaking?
Dude, 100%, Jack. First of all, thanks for having me on, man. I'm always so eager to like hop on and just share my story and share kind of like what drives me. And so, yeah, man, I guess introducing myself to everyone and then also introduce myself to you, because we really haven't, other than Clubhouse, we haven't really, haven't really chatted. So, yeah, backstory on me, Spark Notes version, and then it'll end up becoming like a full length thing and we can kind of run with it. But I grew up in Southern Indiana, right? Basically like a farm community. And to be in the industry that I'm in is actually pretty insane because, like I said, in the place that I grew up, it's very like, hey, you work the job that your father had. And it's very generational, right? So my grandpa, very similar, like farm environment, farm background. My dad, police officer, mom worked for the city. And so anyway, about 14 is when I actually started doing drone video, right? And something that was like super important for me was like just like honestly always being different, right? I didn't want to ever be able to be categorized, right? I didn't want people to be able to be like, hey, like, is Blaine an artist? Is he a skater? Is he an athlete? Like, what is he, right? And so as a result of kind of like living in that manner, I saw a lot of friction, right? Like, and a lot of times there was a lot of pushback. Because naturally, when you're against the grain, people aren't really going to draw near that. They're actually going to push away. And so at a very early age, I kind of like found myself separating into like the people I was with and the things that I were doing. And I was just really fortunate to kind of like hone in on what I thought my purpose was. And that came out of really failure. So again, backstory, at a really early age, I was playing soccer. Because at the school that I was growing up in, they were a predominantly basketball-oriented school. And so in my mind, right, I'm like, okay, how do I be different? So everyone had short hair, I had long hair. Everyone wore blue jeans, I wore black jeans, right? Everyone played basketball. So I'm like, all right, what's the opposite of basketball? Naturally, soccer. And so I started getting really heavily involved into soccer. And because of that, I really didn't have any friends. And I remember, playing recess one day, and I was getting picked on. And at one point, I was like, not to sound depressing, but I was like kicking a basketball against the sidewalk to myself because no one wanted to play soccer. And I remember one of these kids, they pushed me down, and it wasn't the conflict that really like impacted me, but the thing that they said last as they were kind of walking away, one of them was like, hey, like, you're never going to be good enough to play on a team. And for me in that moment, that was the first time in my life that I had been told that I wasn't good enough. Right. And I think we can all relate. Growing up, your parents, they instructing you this certain responsibility that you can do anything. You want to be an astronaut, a firefighter, and, whatever, you can do it. And so around 8, 9, whenever that happened, that was the first time that someone was like, hey, you're not good enough. And, that echoed in me. And I remember going home after that saying, like, you know what, I'm going to prove them wrong. And I'm going to prove them wrong out of anger. And so I started training to be the best soccer player that I possibly could be and make a team. Right. And I, made the travel team, and then I kept working. I made the other travel team, and I kept working. And then I ended up, getting an opportunity to play like on the Indiana Olympic team. And I remember getting there at that stage. And that was a point in my life. I was 13, 14, where I should have felt like really accomplished. Right. Like I should have felt like, man, like I did not only did I make a team, but I made like a substantial team. And I remember at like 13 sitting there and feeling a void, right? I was like, man, like I don't feel complete. And ultimately I was like, this should be, if any moment of my life should be the moment where I was like, hey, like you did it. And I didn't feel that way. And I remember just taking a step back being like, why don't I feel fulfilled? And ultimately what I realized is that I hadn't identified my purpose. I hadn't identified like why I was here. And so I took a lot of self-reflection during that coming time. And ultimately after a couple months, what I was like praying about, reflecting about was that, my purpose is to be a light. And what I realized is that, I didn't enjoy playing soccer, right? Soccer was a huge part of my life. Now video is a huge part of my life. And we'll get into it later in the podcast, but the next 10 years of my life are going to look very different than video. And what shocks a lot of people is that I didn't enjoy soccer, right? But after realizing and getting to that moment, I was like, my purpose is to be a light. And the question that I asked myself is, what platform allows me to reach the most people that I possibly can? Me personally, right? Like, what allows me to be a light to people? And even though I didn't like playing soccer, soccer was taking me to places that I would have never been before, meeting people I would have never met before, and allowing me to be a light to people that otherwise, if I wasn't playing soccer, I wouldn't meet or reach. And so for me, I was like, you know what? I'm going to play soccer, and I'm going to be the best soccer player that I possibly can be in order to fulfill my purpose of being a light. And so at 13, 14, after realizing that, I was like, I know that for this season of my life, soccer is going to be the avenue, the platform that allows me to reach people. But I was like, there's going to be something down the road that's going to allow me to reach more people. I just don't know what that is, right? And very shortly after, GoPro came out. You've heard of GoPro, right?
Yeah.
And I remember being 14, just baffled by the idea of what GoPro stood for, right? And GoPro's philosophy was that, like, everyone deserves to be a hero. Everyone deserves to go pro. And I was like, man, like, how beautiful is that in your own uniqueness, like, what you do is of value. Like, if you're a school teacher, if you're a mom, if you're a cop, whatever you do, like, GoPro's like, what you do matters, and you should showcase that, right? Everyone deserves to go pro. And after, like, diving into GoPro, I was like, you know what? I think at GoPro, that is where in a couple of years, I'm going to reach the most people. And so at 14, I looked up, like, a position at GoPro and, like, what the requirements were. And anyway, the job that I was looking for was the head of content at GoPro. And it required 7 years experience in filmmaking and a bachelor degree in graphic design. And I was 14 in Southern Indiana.
None of that. Not even any of that.
No. And I was like, there's no way, first of all, that a film company is going to hire a 14-year-old kid. And second of all, I didn't want to finish middle school, high school, to then go to college and get a 4-year bachelor degree, to then, get 7 years experience after that for a job that may not even be there. And so what I had decided to do, I was like, you know what, I'm going to do my own thing. So that way, by the time that I graduate, I would have, like, if I started video at that age, when I graduated college, I'd have 7 years experience. No one would ever ask what that experience was from, and I could go straight to GoPro, right? That was kind of the idea. DJI at the time was really coming out too. It was kind of like the same thing. If you heard of DJI, the drone company, yeah. And so, I think it's DJI is what it's pronounced. And I had found them in China or Japan, and I was like, man, like, I think this would be really huge. And so I asked my grandpa if he could give me, like, a loan to be able to buy a drone, buy a GoPro, and start my video business to eventually work at GoPro. And he gave me a loan. It was $2,000 to be able to do it. We went out and we're like, man, okay, well, we bought the drone, bought the GoPro, and I was like, what do we call this? And, our last name's Fuhs. I'm like, okay, we'll do that. Like, what are we making? Videos. All right, Fuhs Video, the creative geniuses we combined it. And that was the start, right? Yeah. And to be honest with you, I had never had the intention of making it like a career. It was more so an avenue, a vehicle to get me at GoPro, which is where I thought the platform for me to reach the most people would be at. That year, we did real estate drone video in Southern Indiana. So we would fly over a farm property. At that time, it was really popular for, like, an airplane pilot to, like, fly over, take one photo of a real estate, because Google Maps wasn't a thing, and be like, hey, here's your farm. People would print it out, put it on to, $300. And so I was like, how can we, like, why don't we fly over with the drone, take 10 photos, do a video, and charge $200? Better, more stuff, better quality, lower prices. Like, it's a game changer. That year we did $4,000. And so at 14, we did 4K, or I did 4K. And I was like, you know what, like this could be something. But something that's super, right, 100%. And so for me, though, I always ask myself, like, how can I be the best version of myself, right? Like, how can I be more of the man that I was yesterday? And so after doing that, I was like, I think really what I need is the availability to do this by myself. My grandpa was involved, but he had the drone. He kept it at his house. I'd have to ask him. I was, cautious. I wasn't training and getting the best shots because I was, fearful of wrecking the drone. So at 15, I decided, I'm going to start out and do this by myself. And so with the 4K that I got that first year, I gave 2K to my grandpa, paid off the loan. And with the other 2K, I went out and bought a new drone and started by myself, started fresh. And at 15 was really the year I said I started Fuhs Video. That year I did not as well. I did 2K in sales. And from my perspective, I was like, dang, what I didn't realize is that my grandpa had provided all the clientele. Obviously, no idea what that even meant. So he took all the clients with him, and I was like, dang, like this is going downhill, right? You go from 4K to 2K, next it's 0.
It could also be like thinking of age. It could be the what would it be, the economy though too? Like, was that around the crash?
It honestly was. Yeah, it wasn't. And I think, like, honestly, it seems weird to say, but the Midwest is typically pretty like standard. Like even when they're like even like during COVID, like they've been pretty. They like not much changes, even if there is like a big crash. But yeah, I don't think economics wasn't it. It was basically like I was a 15-year-old kid trying to make a business, and that's really hard to do. But anyway, that next year when I was 16, honestly, that was the year really everything changed. I was in my garage working on my car at the time, and I got a phone call. And at that point, Fuhs Video was just on Facebook, right? I just had a Facebook page. And I got a call from a construction company, and they were like, hey, like, it's Blaine with Fuhs Video. And I was like, hey, like, yes, like, it is. Like, how can we help you, right? Trying to make my voice as deep as I possibly could. And they're like, hey, like, how much would you charge if we like sent you to, it was like Arkansas, Missouri, Tennessee to do a drone video of our construction site. And at that time, I had never had a video last more than a day, right? Real estate video was a day. Started to do wedding videos that lasted a day. Organizations a day. So for me, I was like, I guess I charge $200 a day. But I was like, are you guys paying for like travel? And they're like, yeah, of course. I was like, oh, okay, of course. Cool. Yeah. And I was like, you guys paying for the stay, like the hotel? And they're like, yeah, obviously. I'm like, oh, okay, obviously, yeah. And still in my head, I'm like, I guess I would charge $200 for the 3 days. So $600 total. But I was like, since you guys are paying for everything, like I would do it for $200. And they were quiet. And I remember they stepped away from the phone for a bit, and they came back, and they're like, hey, Blaine, we were wondering if you would be able to do it for $2,000. And I was like, wow. And I get goosebumps every time because, that was a big moment for me, because that was the first moment, in contrast to when I was 8 and, my classmates told me I wasn't good enough. This moment 8 years later, when I was 16, was the first time that someone outside of my family had said, hey, you may think your value is this, but you're actually worth so much more. Right. And they're like, hey, you think what you do holds a $200 worth, but like actually you're worth as way more. Right. And for me, that was an eye opener where I was like, I think really, if I'm being honest with you, that was a benchmark, a marker in my life that really was what I felt God saying, like, hey, like you need to devote all of your time into video. Then that was just like affirmation to be like, hey, this is worth something. And this is something that you need to pursue. And so for me, I was like, you know what, I'm going to shift my focus that was soccer at the time into video. Right. And that year, we went out, we did that video, and, we did it, posted on Facebook. Someone in Arizona saw it, flew to Arizona the week after, did a video for $2,000 now. And so now 2,000 became my 200, right? So before it was just 200 for every project, now it was 2,000 for every project. Cause now I know that that's, what I'm worth. And so I did a video, then someone in Vegas saw it, flew to Vegas, then posted that on Facebook. Someone in California saw it, flew to California.
20K per day quickly, bro.
yeah, you're exactly right. And to be honest with you, at the end of that year, I always try to be like as open book as possible. At the end of that year, I did around 39K at 16, and I was like, wow, like this is the life. This is like a living, like I can make a living doing this. But more importantly, it was possible. And I think, someone growing up from Southern Indiana, it was very, very foreign for anyone to say, hey, you can do something creative. I don't know if it's painting, graphic design, you know, whatever. You can do that and make a living. That was an idea and a concept that just did not exist. Like that was not a feasible reality. You could not do that. And so at 16 to make a full-time living doing video, I was like, wow, like, okay, like this can be done. And so skipping a couple years, we just started to grow and develop. And I took that money and I hired on a couple of my buddies, and the team began to grow and then grow and grow. And then by the time that I was a freshman in college, you know, we had about like 15, 20 people on and off that, you know, we were like using on a day-to-day basis. And we were doing a lot of wedding videos. We were doing a lot of commercial videos. And at that time I had decided that I should split the company into two entities. So Fuhs Video Weddings, which would be solely focused on wedding videos, and then Fuhs Video Corporate, which would be solely focused on, you know, productions, commercials, and things like that. And we started to grow and develop. And I'll kind of like bridge the gap into now, going into I think it was my junior year of college. I always try to preface and say that like my life was perfect, right? I had a girlfriend at the time. My family's in Indiana. The businesses were as successful as they had ever been. And, you know, for me, like I just felt like it was just peace. I was at peace. And the reason that I want to like bring that to light is because one day, it was October 16th to be exact, I came back from soccer practice and I had no reason to feel like anything other than joy, right? And on October 16th, I remember coming back to my apartment and for whatever reason, I just started crying. And I felt in my heart so clearly that like I was supposed to leave everything and move to Los Angeles. And like, if I'm gonna be honest with you, like I hate Los Angeles, like Indiana, Midwest, like that's my home, right? Like that's where I always want to be. And so on October 16th, I remember coming back into my dorm room or apartment and just feeling so clearly that I was supposed to leave everything and move. And I was supposed to leave my businesses. I was supposed to leave, you know, my college. I was supposed to leave everything and take up my life and go to LA, which I didn't want to do. And so I opened up my journal and I wrote October 16th, like move to LA, and I like closed it up and I was like, I'm gonna try to forget about this, right? Fast forward a couple months, I was down at my birthday party. My birthday is the day before New Year's, and
mine is too.
When's your birthday?
31st.
Okay. Sorry, mine's like the day before, but like we celebrate it, but not like the day. It's not the day of, but and so anyway,
that's so cool.
yeah. But anyway, so we were down at my birthday party, and have you heard of Movement, this watch company?
Yeah, they were big when I was like in college, trying to think of like e-commerce and all.
Totally,
yeah, big player in that.
100%.
I think I saw them maybe like shows and maybe like CNBC Business and maybe Shark Tank. I don't think so. Maybe
I think they did a GoFundMe, but obviously those guys are amazing. But anyway, to connect it to my story, that's when on my birthday they had posted on Instagram that they needed a filmmaker for their New Year's Eve party, and I had reached out. I DM'd them back, and again, they had, you know, several hundreds of thousands of followers, if not millions at that time. And I had about 500, 600 on Instagram, and I DM'd them and I was like, hey, if I was in LA, would totally love to like come out there and shoot for you guys. And they responded immediately, and they were like, hey, like that's too bad. Like we love your work. And I'm like, I was like, what do you mean you love my work? Like I do wedding and construction videos, right? I'm like, I like you didn't know, you're right. And so I was like, all right, well, and I remember I was sitting at my birthday party, and, you know, for me, going on like the idea of being a light, you know, is super huge to weigh. That's how I weigh every decision. Every decision that I make, it's based around the idea of like, can I be a light more here or there, right? And it's like, and even into like the smallest of decisions, right? Like when it comes to like, even in college, like I never went out, never drank alcohol until I was like 21. And even at my birthday party, like, and it's like, for me, it's not that I like disagree with anything, but it's like the question I ask is like, are these things that you are acting on and deciding to move forward with helping you to reach the person that you were created to reach? right? And so for me, I'm like, man, is going out and drinking making me the best version to prepare myself for the opportunity that's going to be 3 years down the road, right? Or should I be trying to learn a new technique in editing that I'm going to need, and like because I know that, that's going to allow me to reach that person, because it's going to give me that job and lead me to that opportunity. And so that's how I always, you know, make decisions. And so there I was at my birthday party with that decision to make, right? And I was sitting upstairs, and all my friends, my high school classmates, were in the basement. And I remember sitting up there with my buddy's mom, and I was like, man, like, I don't know what I should do. And she's like, well, what are you thinking? And I'm like, well, you know, for me, I'm like, do I think I'm being called to like reach someone out in Los Angeles? Or do I think I could like impact some of my old high school classmates like this evening at my birthday party in the basement? Like where do I think I'm going to make the biggest impact? And for me, I was like, you know, I think I'm supposed to go to LA. And so I DM'd them back and I said, hey guys, I totally forgot I'll be in Los Angeles tomorrow. And they're like, hey, that's amazing. We'll see you in Venice. At this point, it was 11 o'clock at night in Indiana. Right. And I'm like, shoot. And I opened up my laptop and I searched like flights to LA. It was a $2,000 round trip flight. And I was about 3 hours away from that airport. Ooh. And so I was like, dang, like, all right, you know, I have to do this. And so I book it and I leave my birthday party, didn't even celebrate, and drive straight to the airport, get to the airport with the clothes that I had on. Luckily I had my camera in my backpack, fly to LA. And, you know, it's important to note, and I think this would be something that I would, you know, just like I would speak really heavily on. Obedience and humility played a huge role in that, right? Because there I was with the company, and I had been doing, you know, video full time for about 5 years at that point, with the team underneath me, and it's very easy in any industry, but especially in filmmaking, to have this egotistical mindset that you are too good for something, right? That it's like, man, once I get to this level, I will never do anything below that. And so something that's really important for me is to just be like, hey, like how I define success is the idea of like how many people that I was created to reach, that I reached them, right? And where I say like humility and obedience plays a big role, I paid $2,000 to do a free party recap video. I'm the CEO of 2 companies, and I'm doing a free party recap video for a watch company because I felt like that's where I was supposed to be, right? And you don't see that in a lot of industries, specifically, you know, my industry within the film world, because a lot of times it's almost like there's levels to it. And it's like, hey, once I start, you know, I'm gonna start doing wedding videos, and then once I start that, I'm gonna do local music videos, and then commercials, and then big commercials, and whatever. And something for me is like, you know, I want to be the guy that will, you know, be the creative direction behind an Adidas launch, but who also, you know, fly to Indiana and shoot your wedding, right? Because for me, the value and the importance is on reaching you, right? And if I feel like I can be a light to you at a wedding, or if I feel like I can be a light to the crew on set of this commercial, you know, that's where I'm going to be. And so anyway, to spark notes it, and then, you know, we'll kind of wrap up because I've been spieling on the whole story, but I did the video, and I remember coming back, you know, I filmed it from 4 p.m. until 4 a.m. At 4 a.m. I flew back, from 4 a.m. until 8 a.m. that night, I had edited the video. And at 8 a.m. I shot it for several hours, and then after I finished, I was hopping on my flight because I had class Monday morning, and I was flying back to school for class, and I sent an email, I go, hey guys, here's the video, you know, thanks so much. Like, I hope, you know, maybe I'll see you guys again, Blaine. Afterwards, you know, they posted the video, and I remember, you know, sitting in college, and around that time, that's when I got several opportunities that came out of that video, to work with a lot of, you know, substantial people. And so basically, you know, that moment is what sparked notes a lot of my working relationships, you know, with Marshmallow and Fujifilm and Adidas, and all of these big clients had came out of seeing that video, more importantly, hearing my story, that I would like leave everything to like chase where I felt like I was supposed to be. And so that really was what separated and started to introduce us into this higher clientele, that moment. And so anyway, I got a text from one of my buddies. He was like, hey, you know, my name's Matt Como. I'm the head of content with GoPro. And he's like, what are you doing the next couple months? And he, DM'd me after that video, and I said, I'm in school, but I said I have no plans. And he's like, hey, is there any way you'd be available to like travel the world with us and do a campaign? And it was like I can't remember what the campaign was for, but I did it. And we went around the world. And after we got back in West Hollywood, he's like, like, what are your plans? And I was like, really don't have any. And he's like, well, why don't you like move in here? Why don't you like live with me and like help me out with videos? And I was like, okay. And so what's important to note is that everything had to happen for what I'm about to say, which will basically give you the reason as to why I do what I do. Going on that, being a light and like reaching people. I had moved to LA, but it was never a decision that I had made. Right. I remember on October 16th, I had felt like I was supposed to leave everything and go there. And I didn't want to believe it, but I kept making decisions that aligned with what I felt like I was supposed to do. And doors opened up that I could have never opened up. Right. And that's where I always say, like, be super aware that like you may not have a clear understanding of where you're supposed to go, but have a clear understanding of where you're at right now. Right. And it's like, I felt like it's not always going to be that clear that you're supposed to do something, but it is actually really clear if you know something feels right or doesn't. And so it's for me, going to movement felt right. Doing that thing felt right. And because I made decisions that aligned with where I felt like my purpose was where it was being fulfilled, things happened that I could have never planned for. Right. That week, I got a message from this girl, and she asked if she wanted to do a photo shoot. And I don't typically like doing that, to be honest with you, because it's like, hey, like, let's just do a free photo shoot. But for whatever reason, I was like, hey, like, yeah, let's do it. And my first,
were you single at the time?
I was. No, it wasn't. I wish I could say it was, but it wasn't. But yeah, I ended up doing the photo shoot, and anyway, honestly, man, like I couldn't have anticipated for what would happen following. We did the photo shoot. It was super normal, and we get done. And this was my first week in Los Angeles, right? I never spent more than 24 hours there. And this was my first week there. As I was living on the couch at Matt's house. And this girl, she picked me up because I didn't have a car. 4 years later, still don't have a car in LA. And we could do a photo shoot, and everything was completely normal. We get done with the photo shoot, we come back to the apartment, and I'm getting out of the car. And as I'm getting out of the car, she just starts to cry. And that was the first time I had met this girl, right? And I'm just like, dang, like, what is going on? And I'm sitting there, and I'm just, letting her kind of cry it out. And she began to explain how like her mom recently passed away from like brain cancer, and how like her dad had left at an early age, and how like the girl's at rock bottom, right? Can't pay rent anymore, is about to get evicted, and she's crying and just telling me everything. And I'm just like, holy cow. And after she gets done telling me everything she's going through, she like turns and looks at me, and she's like, do you believe in God? And I was just like, what a heavy question, right? This is the first time I'd met this girl. And I was like, wow, well, like for me, like I do. And I began to explain like scientifically, like why I think there's things that correlate with the existence of a God. And then I began to explain spiritually, like why there's things that have happened in my life that are just like undeniable, right? And anyway, midnight turns into 1 a.m. and then 2 a.m. and then 3 a.m. And then before you know it, like the sun's rising. And at that point, like we're sitting there and she's crying, I'm crying. And I was like, hey, like, do you care if I just like do real quick? And she's like, yeah, I would love that. And, we prayed together for just a quick time, right? Like 5 minutes. And after we get done, I told her, I was like, as dark as this season like appears to be in your life, like I want you to know like there's going to be a light. You just have to stay with it. And I give her a hug, and that was it, right? I get out of the car, and as she's driving off, I just felt like I couldn't let her go without asking her this question. And so as dramatic as you can possibly imagine, she's at the light, and I run after her car, right? And I run up and I like knock on her window, and I'm like, hey, like I hate to like run after you, but I just like don't think I can let you go without asking you this question. And she's like, yeah, like, of course, like, what is it? And I'm like, out of curiosity, when did your mom pass away from brain cancer? And I was like, I know this is personal, so if you don't want to answer, don't feel like you have to. And she's like, no, it's okay. And she passed away on October 16th. And I said, wow. And I always get emotional saying that. I started to cry. And I was like, what I want you to know is that on October 16th, when your mom passed away, like, my life was perfect. Right. And I woke up, and for no reason other than I felt so clearly that I was supposed to leave my family, leave my business, leave everything that I've ever known to go somewhere that I've never been for someone that I had never met. And I was like, and I didn't realize that until just now. And I was like, you may not think that, like, God's real, but, like, he, for the last 6 months, has been sending me and opening doors in my life on a rescue mission to find you. And what she told me, which baffles me, bro, she was like, she starts crying, and she's like, what I want you to know is that if we didn't have this conversation, like, I had planned to take my life today. And that moment was confirmation that what I'm doing is being a light, is reaching people, right? And I'll be honest with you, there's been 4 or 5 instances like that I have experienced that have been, like, direct, confirmation that, like, hey, like, what you're doing is making a difference. And I'll be honest, like, it's motivating and it gets me excited. But what really gets me excited is the people that I'll never meet, right? Like, the names I'll never know, the hands I'll never shake. Like, that's what gets me excited. And what I live for, right? Like, what the day that I, like, personally live for, and obviously this is, like a preference for my beliefs, but the day I live for is the day that, like, I hope that I die, and, like, I'm sitting in heaven, like, I'm having a conversation, like, similar to how you and I are chatting, like, with Jesus, and, like, I just want to hear him be like, hey, like, Blaine, like, turn around, right? And I hope that, like, I turn around, and, like, for Christians or any faith, we have this idea of bare minimum, right? We have this idea of, like, man, if I do just enough to get to whatever it is, heaven, afterlife, whatever, then, like, I've made it, right? Like, if I live a life that's 51% good and 49%, like, that's fine, right? It's good enough. And for me, like, that is not enough. And it's, like, what I live for, and, like, what I, like, every day I pursue is the day that I die and that I'm in heaven. And, like I said, we're having a conversation with Jesus, like I'm having with you. And for him to be like, hey, Blaine, like, turn around. And, I pray that, like, I turn around and that I just see an ocean of people. Like, I see people as far as the eye could see. And what I yearn for is to hear Jesus be like, do you see, like, everyone out in the crowd, like, everyone that you're looking at? They know me a little bit more because of the life that you lived, right? That's it. And so it's like, for me, everything that I do is in hopes of reaching that one person. Something that fears me, and then I'll stop talking and we can kind of dive into that. But something that really is a fear for me that motivates me is the idea of disqualifying myself from reaching the person that I was supposed to reach. Right? I look at that girl and I think, in a worldly perspective, most people would celebrate their birthday instead of pay $2,000 to do a free video. If I were to have done that, she wouldn't be here. I don't want anything that I do to disqualify for the person I'm supposed to reach. And so every decision that I make is revolving around that idea of, is this preparing me to reach the person that I'm supposed to reach? And if it's not, I don't do it. Right. And that can be, and this sounds crazy, and a lot of my people, and even Dylan, I'd love after this call, you can chat with Dylan, his perspective of me. But a lot of people, they think I live that so vigorously, right? Like, if it's go to play spike ball at the beach or stay in and hop on this podcast, I will literally be like, do I think I can reach someone at spike ball, or do I think I can reach someone, chatting with you? And so that's kind of, my look on everything. And to explain kind of the next 10 years for me, for 10 years, you know, or for a good time, soccer was my life. I hated it, right? But I did it because that's where I reached people. For, you know, a big part of my life now, video. For the last 10 years, I turned 24 this year. For the last 10 years, video has been the platform that has allowed me to reach people. Last year in January, fun fact, I hate video. Never enjoyed video. I have three companies.
I remember that from
right?
Clubhouse.
Yep. I don't enjoy video, but video is the avenue that's allowing me to reach the people that I was created to reach. And so for me, I was praying, last year, I'm like, man, like I hate video. I'd love to get out of it. Is there another platform that I can reach people? And if there is, like, reveal that. And I remember, a week later, I got an opportunity to be an investor in this app company, and I hopped in, and SparkNotes, I ended up buying 20%. So I own 20% of this app company. And I remember hopping on the team call, and within the team call, me stepping in now as kind of like a vital role of their company. What I was very clear to them on was why I became a part of it. And I said, look, guys, I didn't buy this company because I think it's going to make me money. I didn't think that this is, going to be, like a reason as to why I would be involved. But the reason why I started this, or I want to become a part of it, is because, of how I define success. And how I define success is if this company, like, I don't know if it's tomorrow or a week from now, but if this company leads us to just one meeting, and in that one meeting, I don't know if it's the person we hold the door open for, or the barista that we order coffee for, or the person that the client we're meeting with. But if somewhere along the lines, this company allows us to impact one person and be a light in their life, then this was all worth it. And I was like, and on the outside, we can make no money. We can never hit the app store, and it could be a complete failure. But if we can reach one person, then this is successful. And I remember telling them that and seeing them light up. And in that moment, that was like confirmation to what I think was a glimpse of what the next 10 years are for me. And what I think the next 10 years are for me is I think I'm going to be stepping into companies that I hadn't created, and redefining why they operate, like changing the idea. And that's why, your idea, or this, like the theme of this podcast, process over profit, where it's like, that's where I honestly think the next decade for me is going to be redefining how businesses operate, and more so not how they operate, why they operate, right? And very clear that, hey, we're trying to impact people. We're trying to be a light, and that's the goal. That's the focus. And things are going to come along as a byproduct, right? Something I always say is that money is never the objective. It just simply is the outcome, right? And it's like, what I mean by that is, like, I had never created any of these businesses with a set number in mind to make, right? And it's amazing whenever your seed that you plant is grounded on the idea of, like, I'm going to reach the most, not make the most, right? And when you plant a seed in a firm foundation to, like, I'm going to reach the most people that I possibly can because I care about them and I want to be a light in their life, the fruit that tree will produce is fruit that you could have never imagined. And so that, in a long way, I know that was only one question, but that is my story. And so
buckle in, y'all. This is going to be a 4-hour podcast.
yeah. But yeah, man. So that kind of, my background as to why I do what I do. And now, kind of bringing you, like, up to speed, and like One Life, right? We chatted about the jewelry company. So right now I have Fuhs Video Weddings, Fuhs Video Corporate, Fuhs Creative, which is our brand development agency that we launched about a year ago. One Life Rings, which is our nonprofit. These are all the rings, right? And we're just going to start launching a hoodie and a hat. But the idea behind One Life is I wanted to create a company that we could set funds aside to actually change someone's life. And so what we do with One Life is every ring sold, every shirt sold, we have a bank account. We just put all that money in that bank account. And after we break even, we just keep that money in there. And whenever we find someone that we think we can impact, we take that money and we sow into their life. And I don't know if that sometimes, like, we bought a kid a camera once, we gave $1,000 to this random waiter once, we paid someone's rent once. That's the idea of One Life. And then on top of that, recently, I had also, obviously became a part of Solo, which is the new app company that we're involved with. in April, which is what that press release is for. I just recently became COO of a new company, a marketing agency based in New York. Similar outlook. We're really excited to, take what we've been building there and go public with that. And then there's some other businesses that are on the table that I'm probably going to be involved with. So right now, I think my company count is at 7. And, by the end of the month, it could be 8. And so, yeah, man, that's kind of like a very, detailed overview of how I started, and where I'm at now. But I'd love to kind of break into any facet of that you kind of want to talk about or anything you want to like reflect on.
Yeah. I mean, I've had this question since probably the 10-minute market.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. I think I could probably ask like 20 different questions just from what you said, just because there's so much great. Your story is so great, and there's so much passion behind it. There's so much obviously like work and motivation behind it too. But really, what I was thinking of asking was the no you got originally from when you were playing soccer. Like, no, you aren't going to be good. How did that? And maybe the mindset of, because people when they hear no, they're like, okay, I'm just going to prove you wrong. How instead of having that mindset, you said, okay, I'm just going to be a light to others. How did you jump that gap?
Yeah. So if I'm being honest, initially it was not that, right? I typically, whenever I tell my story, I do try to like say, I skipped over it here. What's really important to know, and I'm glad you like made that specification. I at 8, after getting no, had decided out of anger that I was going to prove them wrong. Right. And nothing else. I wasn't at 8. It was not to be a light. It was more so to be like, hey, like I'm going to prove you wrong. And out of anger is what was the driving force to prove them and make that known. And so, I did that. And I think that realization is super important because like I said, from 8 until 13, when I got, I actually made a prestigious team, I had realized that out of anger, there was a void. And I hadn't been doing it to be a light. And so that's where I had to take a step back and be like, hey, like you worked so hard out of anger to prove someone wrong and you did it. You now what? Right? Like you did it, but you feel hollow. And when I felt that, and that's where I've kind of, people are always like amazed to where it's like, you like, why did you like, no one, if I'm being honest, like how many people have identified their purpose? Very few people, right? It's very hard to, and that we have a purpose problem. Like there's an identity crisis in our generation, several generations where it's like, I don't know what I want to do. Right. And what I always say is that like, I had discovered failure at 13, and that failure was emptiness. After getting to a place that I had wanted to get to, but out of anger, that caused me to reflect and be like, hey, like you did this out of anger and you're not happy. So obviously that's not the key to success. That's not the key to fulfillment. And so like, what is? And that's when I realized like, I was created to be a light. Like my life, the reason why I was created and why you were created and why everyone was created, if I'm being honest, everyone's purpose is to be a light. That is without question. What the question is what platform allows you to fulfill your purpose, right? And the cool thing is, and the motivating thing that I always tell people is that you could be created and you may, in your life, like the purpose in your life may be to be a light to only 3 people. That's it. Some people it could be 1 million, some people it could be 1,000, some people it could just be 3 people. That's it. The question that I always try to ask people is that, do you think that the way that you are living your life is allowing you to be prepared for when those 3 people cross your path? Right.
Yeah.
And that's where I say, even like to career choices, like that could be you could be a cash register, you could be a barista, you could be a teacher, you could be a filmmaker, right? What are you doing to prepare yourself for that moment? And so, yeah, to answer your question, how did I bridge that gap? I bridged that gap after realizing that I had done it out of anger and there was a void, and that wasn't there. I didn't feel fulfillment. And so I had to search like what is going to cause it. And after I identified my purpose, every day moving forward has been driven with that passion, that fire to reach the people that I was created to reach.
I think the bigger part of that is if people do truly believe that they can be a light, they have to be prepared if it's just going to be one person or hundreds. Like, I feel like as people, and if we want to be a light, I feel like we want to then focus on the numbers and be like, okay, I truly want to affect the most people possible. When, like, for you, it just started with one. Like, look what you did with the one. The one's alive right now.
Yep.
Like, that's crazy. But people are then going to be like, oh, you know, I want to do the same thing for thousands. And yes, that's great. But how do we have that as a good goal, but stay humble and still focus on the one?
Yep. Yeah. And it's like, and even going on that, right, that idea of like, are you called to reach one person or 10,000, right? Obviously, it's like the one person is the most important, right? And it's like, that's where I say, like, it's a really weird, it's not weird, but it's a really interesting way to look at your life. But to be like, man, think about it. It's like you were born and there was a number over your head, whereas like Jack was created to reach 100 people. That is who, like, I created you to reach. Maybe more, maybe less, but like what you were created to reach was 100 people. What are you doing to reach those 100 people? Because if you reach 75 out of the 100 that you were supposed to reach, right? Did you fail? Right? It's like that weird thing. And that's the idea of like, I don't want that. If I was only created to reach her, that one person, that one girl, my life would be fulfilled, right? I feel like that idea of like, man, like I'm trying to do, the most because I just want to be prepared. Right? Like whatever it is, like if it's, 20 people I was created to reach or 1,000, what would be really disappointing is like to die and let's say go to heaven, right? Whatever you believe, that's for me. Go to heaven and to be like, hey, like here's the people you reached and it was 4 people. And then I turn and it's like, hey, here's who you were supposed to reach. And it was 1,000. And it's like, that would be crushing. Right?
Or the people that you've reached who have then reached others, like it just multiplies.
Oh, 100%, man. Yeah, we really don't take that into consideration. Where it's like, man, like the life. I don't know what that word is, but there's the one word where it's like the idea that someone else has a life as complex as my own, and it's like that idea, like, hey, like like Jack he has life, he has friends, he has family, he has things he likes to do, and it's like you are going. And this is something I always say: you were created to reach someone that I would never reach, right? Where you grew up, the things you like, the friends you have, the job you work, like you were created to reach a different group of people, right? And it's like that idea of like, man, like that one person, because of your impacting of them, who could they go on and reach? And like, you're exactly right. It's like that one can be such a ripple effect. And that's why I get excited because I'm like, man, like I've seen 5 people that I've directly impacted. Indirectly, right? Like how many people are listening to this podcast? Maybe it's one person, but could that one person, be so moved by what we've chatted about today that they go on and reach 10, and that of those 10, they reach 1,000. It's like, man, like, dude, that gets me excited, right? Yeah. And so that's why I love what you're doing here because it's planting seeds, right?
Yeah, it's fuel it honestly drives us too. Like it's as Christians, it's us seeing the fruit. Truly.
Yep.
And it's what makes us want to keep talking with people, keep making content, keep doing what we're doing is because what we see, which is not even us impacting people, it's God doing the work through us.
Yep.
But his work through people, that's what's truly driving us.
Yeah. Yeah. And if I'm going to dive, like, if I'm just be very clear, like when I say be a light, like you're exactly right. What I really mean is like when people like look at me, can I be a reflection of Jesus? That's it. Like I say be a light because like I want people who don't believe or believe different things to still understand the goal. But like from like, like just being like open, it's like it's super huge for me. I'm like, man, like, and this is something I ask my guys where it's like, I say be a light, but what I really mean from a faith standpoint is like when people look at you, can they see him? Right? When they hear you speak, can they hear him? And something that is always like a cool reflection thing that I had started doing to myself is like, as I had stepped onto sets as a director, right? I asked myself, like, if Jesus was the director of this commercial, right? How would he talk to the clients? How would he send an email? How would he respond to the person taking out the trash, right?
I'm thinking of that now.
You know what I mean? And that can be anything. Like if Jesus was a teacher, if he was a chef, if he was a cop, how would he play that role? And I think when you break that down, like it really makes you like second take maybe some things that you're doing, right? I know it definitely did for me.
Just seeing how he's interacted with multiple different people, there's so much thought behind it, and like that's what's really cool about seeing how he reacts. Like sometimes it's really funny because the dude's hilarious sometimes, but like he truly thinks before he says, and what the actions even that go with the speaking is there's so much thought of the how it's going to affect the people he's talking to, or there's the people around him.
Yep.
I.e., when he was talking with the one of the the woman in adultery that she was brought up by a group of guys. He was talking to them, and then he wrote in the sand to distract attention away from her.
Yep.
And then they ended up leaving, and the whole situation was resolved. That's just crazy. How he was being sort of like not rude to the guys, but he was taking away attention from her, and lifting her up as well.
It's like intention, right? What is the overarching direction, and that really comes from like I always say, like obedience, right? There's so many things in my life that I want to do. You know what I mean? And it's like, even in that, like, I'm sure like in that story or any story, like biblically, like I'm sure like Jesus wanted to be like, hey guys, like, are you serious? Right? X, Y, Z. But instead he's like, you know what? I'm going to like do it. I'm going to communicate it through a different method. Right. And it's like to translate that into like a personal reflection. It's like, there's so many times like I want to do something or say something, right? Maybe I want to go snowboarding this weekend, but I'm like, is that really like, and that's where I sometimes go overboard. I'm like, man, is that preparing me to do what I'm supposed to do? Probably not. Right. And it's like, I always say, like, what I want for the moment is at war what I want for a lifetime. And I think that's such it's like, you know, something I like picked up on from Mosaic, the church I go to. But, you know, like going on that kind of idea, you know, I love, you know, like the story of Peter in the boat. Right. And something that I always try to like, just kind of like reflect on my life that I think is such a good story, like regardless if you're Christian or not, is like such a powerful story, to where it's like, you know, like when he's on the boat, right? And like Jesus and the disciples, and this is like after I believe like Jesus passed away, maybe it wasn't, but he was walking on the water, right? Yep. And they look out in disbelief, right? And they like, you know, Peter like steps up and he sees what he thinks is Jesus, but it's like, it's an impossible thing what's occurring. He's like, what is going on, right? And, you know, I love that passage and that story. It like explain it in detail, because when you break it down, there's such a beautiful message that we all can relate to. And so basically, you know, what happens, and like if I could imagine that taking place today, what I would imagine how the conversation would be is something like, yo, like, yeah.
Not on Barstool. It would be viral video. It would be like, whoa, what is this going on? People are like, oh, it's magic, Chris Angel, something like that.
Yeah, totally. But like the conversation that takes place and the action that follows is so beautiful, right? Because like what happens, and I'll word it in 21st century, basically, you know, Peter's like, yo, like Jesus, like, is that you?
Hell no.
Right? Yeah, right. And, you know, I love, because Jesus is like, you know, he's like, hey, like, if you don't think this is, if you don't think I'm, you know, this is me, if this is happening, it's like, step out of the boat, Peter. Right. And if I had to give an analogy or a metaphor to what the boat is, right? The boat is our life, right? Like imagine your boat, and in that boat, like there's Peter, and Peter is you, right? And in that, and that exactly right. Like that boat is comfortability, it's comfort, and it's like in that boat was his friends, was his life, was everything that he had ever known, right? And I love what happens, because Jesus is like, hey, like if you don't think this is possible, like come out here, right? And you know, Peter in that moment is like, he'd be like, yo, are you crazy? Like, do you understand what you're asking me to do? Like, I know that you're God, and like, you make the mountains move, and you created everything, but it's like, that's water. And like, Jesus, I don't know if you know anything about science, but water is liquid. And last time I checked, like we can't walk on liquid, right? And what I imagine Jesus saying is like, look, Peter, like I know that water is liquid, but like I want you to trust that like my word is solid. And like when I ask you to step out, like step out. When I ask you to move, move. When I ask you to do something that may seem crazy, like do it. And you know what I think is so beautiful in his story is that it isn't if you read back on his story of that, it wasn't the second step, right? I think we talked about this in on the Clubhouse. It wasn't the second step or the third step that was the scariest for Peter in that moment. It was the first step, right? Mm-hmm. Because when Peter stepped out of the boat, in that first step, he had no idea what was to come. He didn't know if he was going to sink or if he was going to do something that was not possible. And I think it's so beautiful because, Peter steps out, and that first step for anyone listening is the most difficult, right? And it's like that first step is what affirms that, hey, what you're doing actually isn't impossible. And so I love that story because Peter steps out and he first step, and then the second step, and he starts walking on water, right? And, as the story continues, Peter is doing it, right? And then as the story goes on, then Peter starts to look down, right? Mm-hmm. And he looks around and sees what he's doing is crazy, right? Mm-hmm. And in that moment, right, he sinks. The message behind that is the moment that you step out of your comfort zone, you step out of your boat, step into a world that you have never experienced before. It isn't crazy until you look around and hear the voices around you saying what you're doing is not possible, right? Because when he was focused on the goal, when he was focused on like Jesus, he was doing what he had set out to do. But the moment he looked down was the moment he sunk, right? And I always like to turn that on to people is like, what is God, or more so like if you don't believe in God, like what do you feel like what boat are you feel like you are being called to leave? Right? Like, where are you being called to go that you are too concerned with being comfortable that you never step out of the place that you've been to go somewhere that you've never gone before? Mm-hmm. And more importantly, what awaits, right? Like and I always like, if you think of like the ocean as where your life could go and your world is that boat, it's like, man, like where is God calling you that because you're too comfortable with where you're at, that you don't fulfill what he had hoped for you to fulfill. Mm-hmm. And so that's always like a motivating thing that I kind of like reflect on, like, man, like, could I, even if something's crazy, like even if something seems like it wouldn't work, would I be willing to leave my businesses, leave my family, step out of my boat, my comfort zone, and go to a place that I've never been, right? And so anyway, yeah, I love that.
It's almost scary sometimes in that if you think like, what if I don't? What if I am just here comfy and not taking those steps out? What if I miss that? What if I'm not doing this thing that would lead me to go and be a light to others and impact others and do that and miss that opportunity almost? Yep. Which, I mean, God also has, he'll get his plan done no matter what zigzag up, down it is. But that's sort of like, you want to be present enough in every situation to be ready, almost. You're prepared for what he wants you to do and where he calls you.
Totally. And like going off of that, like you're exactly right. What I've always said, I don't want God to send someone else to do the job that I was created to do. Right. Mm-hmm. And like, if you think of like the story of like David and like King Saul, like Saul was the appointed king of Israel until he got off track. Right. And the moment that he got off track, God said, I'm going to have to send David now to realign with what I need to be done. And it's like, you're exactly right. I don't want anything that I'm doing to, like I said, disqualify myself. Right. Like Saul, like I want to do, or Solomon, like I want to do what I'm supposed to do. And so like that idea, like I don't want God to send someone to do the job that I was created to do. Definitely drives me. But yeah, that idea of fear is huge.
Mm-hmm. I would, we can try to go back to more time. I mean, this is relating to business completely because how we live our lives. But what are some, obviously, like we're both young guys in business, what are some just like motivational, what are some tangible actions or tips that you have for people who are where you were, or people who are getting those no's and maybe discouraged by that, or just early in the stages of building businesses?
Yeah, I mean, I would always say like obviously the first thing is like stay online with what you're called to do, right? Like I've had so many no's, and having the piece that that those no's are actually redirection, which doesn't always you don't always have that insight, right? Like you think a no is a personal thing, maybe
Mm-hmm.
someone doesn't hire you, or maybe they choose to go a different direction, and it's like what I always say is like have like peace knowing that it wasn't rejection, it was redirection, right? And like that is huge, right? Where you think like if you didn't, maybe someone didn't whatever respond to your email or call you back or move forward with you, like that rejection a lot of times is personal defeat, and people are like, hey, like I'm gonna take that to heart, and like that's going to affect me. And I'm like, look at that moment as not, again, that rejection as redirection to where you were supposed to go, to the client you were supposed to meet, to the opportunity you were supposed to accomplish. And it may not always be what we thought, right? If you look at me in my life, what I was supposed to do, or what I had started Fuhs Video for, was to work at GoPro. That was the reason I started it, to work at GoPro. And in pursuit of where I thought I was supposed to be, the life that I was actually supposed to live had revealed themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I say, like, if I had to give a tip to people, is like, don't get so focused on where you're going that you forget where you're at, and that those moments that are right in front of you are actually like preparing you for what it is that is to come. But it really comes down to like, man, like, do you have, again, I go back on that idea of obedience, even when it doesn't look like the story that you want to write. Can you have the obedience that what you're doing is preparing you for what's actually supposed to happen? And as we know, a lot of times what we want to happen is not always what needs to happen, right?
Yeah.
Like there's so many clients that I thought I needed to get. I remember when I was 16, one of my first big rejection video was a bank, and I was 16, and they had $50,000 for an informative video, and I was like, holy cow. And I remember going into that, and yeah, like, and it was between us and another client. And we went in there, and I never had a video more than 2K, right? That was the first year I started charging 2K. And I remember going into that meeting, and I went in wearing like a t-shirt and khakis. And we went in, we're like, hey, this is the video we would make, and we would do it for 48,000. And we got out of it, and then the other video company came in, older gentlemen, really crappy videos. I'll be honest with you, we are way better in video quality, just so everyone knows, vividly better. And they came in suits and ties, and they said they would do it for 50 plus. They got the video, not us. I remember leaving that meeting being like, what could we have done better? And that was a rejection. That was a obvious rejection.
No, it was a redirection.
100%, 100%, right? And that's where I say it's a decision, right? You could take that rejection to heart, and I could have been angry and been like, you know what? Like they didn't want us. Like they whatever. They don't deserve us. Like, you know what I mean? Like they're not good enough for us. But instead, I took that moment and I was like, all right, we got, said no. What is there to change that will prepare us? Like that was a moment that was preparing us for $100,000 contract, $1 million contracts that we are now involved with, right? And it's funny to note, I'm just gonna be very honest. Typically our contracts are around 6 figures. That's like typically like our contract range. Within the last year or so, we started getting into the 7-figure, like $1 million contracts. And I was having a conversation with Gabe, who's like a really close friend of mine. And I was telling him, it's so interesting when it comes to timing, because I look at what's happening in like my life now, right? The numbers that we are talking with, the clients that we're associating with. And I had thought 4 years ago that I was in a place ready for that. Me now standing in front of you, getting off of a call that's like a multi-million-dollar deal, I can tell you with complete confidence that like that does not, like honestly, when I hear $10 and I hear $1 million, it literally is the absolute same to me. And it's so interesting because like If you said, hey, we're going to do $1 million contract 4 years ago, I would like to think that I would have the obedience and the direction to not be distracted by that. But I honestly can probably say that probably would have affected me in some way. Like the things that I say, maybe the way that I acted, maybe like the things that I would not do and do. And honestly, I wouldn't be ready for it. Like if what is happening right now for us and our businesses happened to me 4 years ago, I would not be prepared. I wouldn't be ready. And I think that goes in like to just like say that to a lot of people. It's where it's like, there are things that you think need to happen now. Right. But what I want to like say is that it is all, and this is a metaphor, but this is truth into reality. It is easiest to kill a king when he's a baby. Right. And I'll change that around as well. It's easiest to chop down or kill a tree when it's in seed form. Right. And I'm like, what businesses are growing in you, developing you, characteristics that are growing in you, developing you, that if you were to blow up, would you be ready? Right. And if I had to look at it in like an analogy, whenever I ended up, quote unquote, getting to that top tier level of working with those big clients, to be honest with you, I was like 17, 18. I was young. Obviously, I'm still young, but I remember getting to a point where it was like obvious. I was like, I had gotten to a place in my career I never had thought I would get to. And I was disappointed because I was like, man, like this isn't what I thought it would have been. And in my life, if you look at it as like a plant or a tree, I had felt like at 14, I had planted a seed that was video. Throughout the years, I had watered it. And throughout the years, it had grown. And at that point, I was a tree and I was bearing fruit and I was impacting people. And the only thing left for me to do was slowly wither and fade, like and die. Right. And a quote that I absolutely love is that the place of death and the place of life look very similar for a point in time. And I got that from my church, that, a Transformation Church in Oklahoma. But the idea that when you die, you dig a hole, you bury it, and you wait. When you're planting a seed, you dig a hole, you bury it, and you wait. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Either it grows or it doesn't. And at that point in my life, when I had reached a place that, I thought was the pinnacle, I had thought there was nothing left to do was to die. And like not die, but like it was going downhill. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like the ceiling was reached, and I'm like, there is nothing more. And what I came to the realization is that I had thought my life, I planted a seed, I watered it, it grew, and now it's a tree, and now I'm bearing fruit, and now it's just downhill. But the idea that, I'll give you the tree analogy again. If my life, if that was the case, what I had thought had been the process of full development, in reality, I hadn't even broke the surface, right? And it's like, I always like try to like tell people that is like, man, you may think that you've broke the surface, but really it's like, and going on to God, it's like, what is God trying to create you for that you need a deep foundation, right? Like again, and I say that with the numbers that we're working with and the people we're doing now, God had been growing roots. If my life is a tree, he's been growing roots in my life to prepare myself to bear the weight that was going to be coming to me that is now, right? And like what I mean by roots is character, discipline, obstacles, failure, right? Each root just grew deeper and more roots, because if you look at a picture from a plant growing, there might be the tiniest little thing of like breaking the surface, but thousands of roots below the surface, right? And I think like advice that I would give anyone, if it's your business or if you're an employee, right? And just trying to develop your character and looking at your life being like, man, like I don't feel accomplished, or I don't feel like I've done enough. And it's like, man, like to be completely transparent, like God's probably doing a work in you that's preparing you for what he is trying to do in your life down the road. Right. And it's like, for me, when I was like 16, 17, I had thought like, that was it. But really what I realized is that for that whole time, for the last decade of my life, it had just been me growing roots. And it's like, I look at my life now and I get so fired up about it, because I'm like, man, like I haven't even broke the surface. Like every client I've talked to, every business that I've like been involved with, like it's preparing me for the next chapter of my life where I'm excited to impact, as many companies as I possibly can. And yeah, so it's like, and the last thing I'll say before that, if I had to give a breakdown between the difference, let's imagine you're a tree and you made it. And let's even talk about followers. Let's say that you have like you're starting Instagram. Let's say this podcast, right? You start this podcast and overnight it goes from 100 followers to 1 million followers, right?
Oh, so you'll
right?
hear that, you start sharing it. Share it.
Yeah. But like, let's imagine that. And it's like, if that were to happen, and this is just like a self-reflection thing. It's like, do you have the foundation of integrity established enough that what you're doing now, you would do there, right? And I always say, like, the idea of like a platform, I love the story of like David and like his whole story, but it's like what David did at a lower level, right? As a servant is exactly what he did at a higher level. And so to kind of like, like break that down into like what that means is like what you're doing as the employee should be exactly what you would do if you were the boss, right? How you treat people at a lower level in maybe your career or financial status or whatever is how you should treat people whenever you do get to wherever you like aspire to be. And so it's like that idea of like, you're being molded is super important. So obviously that there was a lot of things in there that, hopefully anyone, listening in or hears it, that will hopefully chew on. But yeah, I think that'd be my advice.
Yeah, that's so good. I think that's a lot of really good motivation for just people out there just maybe feeling discouraged or younger and just starting to get into things. I wanted to touch on, obviously, like, you had to start somewhere. And, I think the big part was for you is leaving your birthday to go do the free gig. Like, you're sort of doing that free work to obviously like build portfolio and network and all.
Yep.
What's the value? What how do you see the importance of is doing that like free work and getting out and networking? I feel like a lot of people obviously like, you start small, $200 and some figs. That's growth, but you have to do it over time. So like it might not happen overnight. What should you say to people and how they value themselves when they are starting the work and are growing?
Yeah, I mean, I think like again, I'm open book. So how I started, we'll kind of like switch business, and I'm sure it'll get into purpose again. But I always try to say, like, when I started doing video, I picked every category that I wanted to be involved with. Right. So I said, I want to do real estate. I want to do wedding. I want to do organization. I want to do music videos. I want to do commercials. Right. I got those categories. I found one client in Southern Indiana that met those needs. I found a real estate agency. I found a corporate client. I found a car dealership. I found a musician. Like, you find those categories. I went to each of them and I said, hey, I'll give you like the wedding video, for example. I said, hey, I'm going to shoot your wedding video for free. Right. I shot this person's wedding video for free one time. Right. I did the absolute most with my resources that I possibly could. I was like, I'm going to do this free video to the standard of how I would do every single video if they were to pay me thousands, right? And I did that for a wedding company. I did that for a commercial company. I did that for a music video. I did every one of those categories, whatever category it is. I did one for free, and I used that as my portfolio, right? One time. And that's where a lot of times people get stuck in there. We're like, oh, I'll do free opportunities to like whatever, get another opportunity. That's a loophole. Right? Like, you're of value right now, period. Right? It's like what you have to do if you're starting at zero is like just absolute express your value and your worth. Right? So I did that. I had a wedding video, commercial, I had all those things. I made a website, and then I went down to the competitor. Right? We'll take a commercial, for example. I did, let's say we did the construction video. Let's just pick a construction video. It's like, hey, I'm going to do this construction video for free. Right? Or a corporate client. We'll do a corporate client for free. Do it for free, make it absolutely amazing. Go down to the other corporate client in the town over and say, hey, this video I did for X, Y, and Z, and I charged them $10,000. But I'd love to do this one for you for $5,000 because I believe in what you guys are doing here. Right? They're like, in their mind, they're like, wow, I'm getting a deal.
Sales, yeah.
Yeah. And then that's how you grow. And it's honestly as simple as that. Obviously it gets more complex as you start to scale and systemize it, but whatever you're doing, like if it's event planning, find one person and say, hey, I'm going to do your event. I'm gonna do it for free, do it absolutely amazing. And then go down to another person and say, hey, I planned this event. They paid me 30 grand. I'd love to do yours for 15, right? That like literally it is as easy as that. And so to kind of go on like my perspective of doing free projects, do it one time, crush it, never do it again. And even like, and funny thing, I did before I did like started working with like the big, athlete commercials, stuff like that, like the Ultra Boost, like had the honor of like, heading that like in the creative post-production. But I remember like, so let's say you don't have the resources. This is video specific. I went onto a stock footage website and I downloaded a bunch of free stock videos. They were doing like, hey, like every email gets like 5 free stock videos. So I made 20 fake emails and I downloaded a bunch of stock footage, right? And I made a story. I did a story of like how I wanted, like it looked like a $100,000, $200,000 commercial. And I put that video together. And then after I like had that video together, I put Nike's logo on the end of it. Who cares? Like who literally cares, right? And then I went down and like, so then, and I was basically preparing myself for if anything were to ever happen. This was like this is when I was like really young. Because like, let's say Adidas calls and they want a video. Hey, what have you done? Hey, here's something, here's what I can do. Right. Yeah. And so it's like that idea of like, and I always like with anything, right? Even like, again, you're starting out. Like one of my buddy, he's honestly one of the most talented guys ever, but and he works with a lot of big companies, but he showed me like some ads that he made for like what we call like spec ads, right? And spec ads, again, that's for anyone who doesn't know what a spec ad is, it's basically you're like, hey, I'm going to make a Pringles commercial. Pringles didn't hire me, but I'm going to make a Pringles commercial and send it to Pringles and maybe they like it. Don't do that. It honestly will never work. I always say like, it's just the dumbest thing. But for a portfolio builder, like if you want to
social media, like I read it on the Clubhouse app icon, just to tag them and things and
totally. Yeah. But I mean, you can do it like as a leverage, right? Some people think that like Clubhouse would never buy that. Like, you know what I mean? Like realistically, they won't. Like that just doesn't happen. But they could get inspired and they could find your name, and then it's like, hey, we don't want you to do this, but we like what you did. Right. And it has to be different. But I always say like my buddy, he did an Airbnb campaign and it was like with animals and it was like, be comfortable wherever you're at. That like, it was a spec campaign, super creative. It was like a dolphin on like, in like a beach or something, or not a beach, like a desert. And it's like, oh man, that's like such a creative, or like an owl in like the freezing climate. And it's like, it was just so cool. And so anyway, for like any advice on like how I would do it if you're starting at zero, do it for free, do one for free in the categories you want to pursue, use that as leverage for the competitors or other people within that industry that, you can really honestly start your company from zero and go to 100 really quick.
Mm-hmm. Any lessons you learned? I mean, I guess all of your lessons you learned transfer over from business to business, but what are the most valuable just lessons you've learned from managing businesses on your own? Well, now you have people running it with you too, and now that you're investing and getting into other things, you're not necessarily the sole owner of things, but from running it on your own to now being diversified into multiple different parts of business. What are some management principles that just hold true?
I honestly think it's just one, and if you actually care about your clients. Like period, end of story, right? And that's why I always say like in all of our meetings for every client, we have an expectation section. So like if we ever have a client that reaches out, we'll talk them through obviously what they're needing, but then we make it really important that we're going to express our expectations. And what I mean by expectations, and this is what we always say, is that like, hey, we actually care about you. Right. And it's very common for a lot of businesses or people or freelancers to be like, I just want to get as much money out of you as I possibly can. And what I'm very clear on is like, we care about your success. And if we cannot help you, we are not going to offer you anything. Right. And even like from our branding perspective, like we do brand audits on our clients. So we'll go in and we'll be like, all right, what do they do well? Like what is even good enough, right? Maybe like they don't have something great, but it gets them by. We'll tell them that, right? And like there's some clients where we could have made 50 grand off of a website, but we said, hey, really? The website you have is fine. And they'd be like, well, we really wanted 50 grand on the website. I'm like, no, like we're not going to do it, right? And like that happens like more than you would think. And you know what the cool thing is that people see that. And so as far as like lessons that or advice like that I've learned throughout the business operation, when you actually care and you are open and honest with everyone, if it's a wedding client, if it's like Adidas or whatever, to be like, hey, I could charge you right now, but here's why I'm not, right? Because you don't actually need it. And it's so it's like I say it's really simple. It's like I care about you and nothing else. And if I get your money or if I don't get your money, I don't really care. As long as you know we're a light to you, that's it. And so we honestly tell people that. Like every client, we're like, hey, we'd love to work with you, but you know, if we're not needed, we're not gonna let you know whether we're needed. We're not gonna act like you need something you don't. And so I think again, people can see that. People can see that in the way you talk to them and the way you email them, being like desperate, not desperate. I'm always like, hey, like just act when you care. People know. And I would say that is the biggest thing I've learned is to like be really authentically yourself. And businesses are attracted to that.
Well, we've gone over a lot. And I think that's a pretty good note to end on, honestly. Do you have any calls to action for the people listening or viewing like your website? So you're probably everywhere if you have multiple different things that you're involved in, but just like onelife.com or what are some things you want to say to advertise yourself?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, nothing really. I mean, like if anyone ever wants to reach out, you can always like reach out to me or like personally on my Instagram. Obviously like I'm an open book. So I guess like the biggest thing is if anyone has any questions, or is like watching this now, is this going to get, like it'll get uploaded too, right? So it's not just live.
It's going to be on YouTube. So it's going to live on YouTube as the full podcast. I'm going to try to break it down into
custom things.
We'll see. My Wi-Fi is being a little iffy, and so I might have gone in and out here and there. So we'll see what I can actually take from it. But, that's the goal. Now I have to rewatch the whole thing.
Now an hour 30, well spent. But I think anyone watching, if you guys just have like any questions at all, obviously like time is definitely limited. But you know, Jack, as you know, I'm always more than willing if I think, you know, there's even an opportunity to impact one person to help on that. So, you know, if anyone is watching this or you see something in it that you think would, you know, connect with someone, you know, I'd personally love, if you just, you know, share whatever you think would impact them, through this podcast. And then, if anyone has any questions, just reach out to me on Instagram, Blaine Fuhs, BlaineFuhs. As far as business and stuff, you know, it's all good.
Yeah, man. Well, anyone listening, feel free to reach out to either of us. Again, we met on Clubhouse, and this was basically us sitting face to face down and just chit chatting about some business and filmmaking. I asked maybe 3 questions total, and somehow it's an hour and a half. And so I'm glad we could make you just have content just at the ready, and talk about a lot of really great things. And so I'm glad that people got to hear it, and you know, we spread content and be a light. That's obviously the goal of the podcast.
100%, bro. Appreciate you so much, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, man. Peace.
Awesome. See you, brother.